Hello, everybody. Welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to go through planet friends and enemies. In Sanskrit, that would be Graha Mitra and Shatru. And this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective, so keep that in mind. I thought this might be a good one because we just came off of Valentine's Day, and then next week we actually have a planetary war between Venus and Mars. So, yeah, I think this period of time when I'm recording this is all about, friends and enemies and who's what and who's really what. So let's get into it. Okay, so if you're new to Vedic astrology or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject in my concepts playlist, they can all be found there. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that topic if you'd like to learn more. For this talk in particular, again, if you're a newbie, you might check out these videos that I've made already so to get more out of this talk. So the first one is North, South, and East Indian style charts. I also cover Western charts in there, although that's not part of the title. And then there's Introduction to Reading a Birth Chart, the Lagna, also known as the Ascendant, Rising Sign, First House, Introduction to the Constellations or Rashis, and then Planet Exaltation and Debilitation or Ucha and Nicha. Okay, so planet friends and enemies. So planet is Graha, friends is Mitra, and enemies is Shatru in Sanskrit. So okay, so the basic concept here is that planets can have a friendly, neutral, or inimical or enemy type energy towards each other. Okay. So whenever you see a planet that's in a friend sign, so again, this gets back to the notion. Again, that's why that video on the constellations is important. Is that each sign is ruled by a particular planet. Okay, so for example, Gemini is a planet is a constellation that's ruled by Mercury, the planet Mercury. So we say that Mercury owns or rules that house. Okay. So if there's a planet in Gemini, so if Jupiter is in Gemini, or Moon is in Gemini, or Sun is in Gemini, then what we're looking at is that particular planet is Mercury a friend, a neutral party, or an enemy to the planet occupying sign? So if a planet is in a friend sign, that means that the planet occupying the friend sign will be supported and stronger, just like your friend supporting you. Okay. If a planet is in a neutral sign, then that means that the planet doesn't gain strength or weakness by being in that sign. And then the third situation is if a planet is in an enemy sign, then that means that the planet's energy is going to be diminished or weaker. Okay, so we have three different possibilities here. Now, it's also important to know that some relationships, just like in human life, in our life, right? Some relationships are mutual and some of them are not. So sometimes you'll have one planet that's an enemy to the other, but then the second planet is a friend of the first. So, and sometimes the two planets are friends, both friends, and sometimes they're both enemies, but you can get combinations of all those. Okay. The other thing to know is that, when we're talking about planet friends and enemies, we are also thinking about the concept of the two camps concept. So there are essentially two camps of planets, of the 7 planets that we use this friends and enemies um, concept. Okay. We don't use actually Rahu and Ketu. So there are 9 classic planets in classic Jyotish. We don't actually use Rahu and Ketu in this. Um, and it's also important to know that the concept of soul enemy, which sounds similar, is a concept that's used in analysis of the amshas, also known as the sub-zodiacs, also known as the subdivisional charts of the main natal chart. Okay, so don't confuse this concept of planet enemies with soul enemies because it's different. Okay, and again, in planet, what I'm talking about today, we don't use Rahu and Ketu. Okay, so getting back to the two camps concept, the first camp is composed of Sun, Moon, Mars, and Jupiter. So generally, these planets, when they're in each other's houses, they're going to be friendly and supportive. Okay. Now, the second camp is Saturn, Venus, Mercury. So when these planets are in each other's houses, generally they're so friendly, supportive, and stronger. Okay. Now, when you cross camps, when moon or sun goes into a different sign, like in a Saturn, Venus, Mercury sign, generally speaking, they will be weak, neutral, or weaker. Okay. So, yeah. But they definitely won't be friends for the most part. There are exceptions to this, and I'll go through the exceptions. But so again, two camps, one camp, Sun, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, the other camp, Saturn, Venus, Mercury. And generally, people support and are friendly to people in their own camp. When they cross camps, then you can either lose your support or actually gain an enemy. Okay. So let's go ahead. Okay, so here's the chart, or not graph, yeah, chart of planet relationships. Okay, so the way this is laid out is in the first column here, you have the 7 different planets or grahas of classical Jyotish or Vedic astrology. And again, we're not including Rahu Ketu here. And then you'll see the second column is friends or Mitra. Okay. So, and then the third column is neutral or sama. That's like the same energy. Yeah, sama is sort of like same. That's close of a it's a close translation in Sanskrit. And then this last column is enemies or Shatru. Okay. So if we just look at the first line here with sun or Surya, as it's known as in Sanskrit. So if we think about the sun, if it's in a house ruled by moon, like Cancer, Mars, which would be Aries or Scorpio, or Jupiter, which would be Sagittarius or Pisces, then the sun would be in a friend's house and it would be stronger. Okay. If the sun is in a sign ruled or owned by Mercury, which would be Gemini or Virgo, then nothing changes for the sun. It doesn't get stronger, it doesn't get weaker. Okay. If the sun is in a constellation ruled by Venus or Saturn, so Venus rules Libra and Taurus, and Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius, then the sun would become weaker. Okay. Now you could see in the sun's line here, the friends are Moon, Mars, Jupiter. So again, remember camp 1 is Sun, Moon, Mars, Jupiter. So sun is following that rule or idea concept. Okay. Then the neutral and enemy houses are for the sun are going to be Mercury, Venus, Saturn. So again, Mercury, Venus, Saturn compose the second camp. Okay, so sun follows along with that. Now we do have exceptions, and you can see in this chart here, the moon, I've highlighted in blue. Everything else is black here. The planets that are listed in blue are the planets that aren't following the 2 camp rule. So you can see that the moon has exceptions and Mercury has exceptions. So the 2 planets indicating different qualities of the mind. So the moon is the emotional mind and Mercury is the rational mind. Those are the 2 that, have a little bit flip-flop there. Okay. So let's just look at moon now. So again, if we're talking about the moon, where is the moon located? If it's in a house ruled by sun, which is Leo, that's the only house that sun owns or rules, then it would be in a friend sign and it would be supported and it would be stronger. The moon would be stronger. Okay. So make sure you don't confuse the house getting stronger with the planet occupying the house getting stronger. It's about the planet occupying the house that gets stronger or weaker or neutral. Yeah. Then if moon is in a sign of Mercury, so again, Gemini or Virgo, the moon would also be stronger because Mercury signs are friendly to the moon. They support the moon. Okay. But you can see here that the moon is not following the 2 camp rule exactly. It is in the same camp as sun, but it's not in the same camp as Mercury. So the moon does have exceptions. Okay. And then if we look at the neutral column here, so we can see that Venus and Saturn are neutral places for the moon to be. And, that fits. I mean, we would expect Mercury to be, neutral or enemy as well if it was exactly following the 2 camp rule, but for a concept, but it's not. Okay, but Venus and Sun makes sense. But we can see Mars and Jupiter are neutral to the Moon instead of being friends of the Moon. So again, the Moon is an exception. The other thing that's notable about the Moon line here is that the Moon doesn't have any enemy constellations. So Sun and Mercury supportive, the other planets are neutral, but there's no place that the Moon can be in terms of this planet friends and enemies concept where the Moon gets weaker based on this. Okay, so we say the Moon has no enemies. It's important to remember. Okay, and you can see then for Mars, that follows the rules. So they're friends, Sun, Moon, Jupiter, right? Same camp. And then neutral to Mars, Venus, Saturn, and enemy Mercury. So Venus, Saturn, Mercury are the other camp. So they're neutral or enemies to Mars. Then Mercury, this is the other exception. Mercury is stronger because it's in friendly signs of Sun and Venus. It's neutral to Mars and Jupiter and Saturn. So Saturn, again, is a little bit of an exception. And actually, the worst place for Mercury to be based on this concept is in Cancer because Cancer is ruled by the Moon. Okay. Then the rest of them follow suit. So you can see Jupiter, the friends of it are Sun, Moon, Mars. So again, the four of them are in the same camp. And the neutral, Saturn, Mercury, Venus, neutral and enemies. Then for Venus, the friends, Mercury, Saturn, that follows the camp, idea theory. And then the neutral enemy signs for Venus are Mars, Jupiter, Sun, Moon. Okay. And I tend to remember the enemies of Venus because the Sun and the Moon. Venus is the brightest planet in the sky, usually. And Sun and Moon obviously are brighter, right? I mean, because they're the great luminaries. And so sometimes to remember this, I think of, Venus can be a little bit vain because Venus is like the planet representing beauty. So Venus doesn't like to be outshone by the sun and the moon. So that's why they're enemies. Anyway, you can make up little stories, if you know the symbolism of the planets. Okay, so anyway, and then the last line here, we have Saturn or Shani and the friends, Mercury, Venus. So again, Saturn, Mercury, Venus are in the same camp. And the neutral and enemies signs to Saturn are Jupiter, Sun, Moon, Mars. So that's the other camp. Okay, so that's how you use the chart. And again, if I'm talking about rulership of signs and constellations, and that's news to you, I would check out my Intro to Constellations Rashi's video because that will help you learn which signs are ruled by which planets. So again, the moon has no enemies. The other thing to note here is that you can see Jupiter is not an enemy to any other planet. So if you look at the last column, in enemy houses, Jupiter is not there. So that's nice to know also. So the moon can be anywhere and not have enemies, but the other thing is that any planet in a sign of Jupiter, so either Sagittarius or Pisces, is not an enemy house. Okay. And then, as I mentioned, Moon and Mercury have exceptions to the two camp concept. Okay, so on the next slide, I have a chart, a practice chart that you can kind of go through, or we can go through together. But this is what you can do for yourself: is look at charts and just go through and look at the grid that I gave you, and just practice. Okay, it's also important to remember and not get confused by the concept of exaltation and debilitation, because that's another way to determine if a planet is strong or not. The thing is, exaltation and debilitation gives a greater level of strength or weakness. We would consider that a primary strength or weakness. And this concept of friends and enemies is kind of a secondary strength or weakness. Okay. So if a planet's exalted or debilitated, that's actually more exaggeration in terms of strength or weakness versus the friends and enemies idea. Okay. So anyway, what we have here in this mock chart is a Libra rising, Libra Lagna, and again, if this is already confusing to you, you might check out my the videos I listed in the beginning. But the Lagna here, the rising sign first house, you look for the diamond at the top, since this is a North Indian style chart. Okay. And in the corner of the top diamond here, you have a 7. That 7 represents not the 7th house. This is the first house, but the 7 represents the 7th constellation of the zodiac, which is Libra. Okay, so you have a Libra rising. Okay, now there are 2 planets in Libra. Okay, so we have Moon in Libra, and Libra is ruled by Venus. So if you look at your chart, okay, and you go through, and it's like, okay, so Moon is the guest, and it's in a house of Venus. So if you look at the chart, you can see Venus is neutral to the Moon. So for that reason, I've colored Moon blue to be neutral. Okay. Then if we look at Saturn, now again, the 2 camps theory here, Saturn, Mercury, Venus, we would guess, if we had to guess, if we didn't memorize the chart, that Saturn is going, or Libra, because it's ruled by Venus, and Venus is in the same camp as Saturn, or that this is going to be a friend sign of Saturn, and in fact it is. Okay. Now the thing though is that even what's more important actually is that Saturn is exalted. Saturn is exalted in Libra. So not only is Saturn in a friend sign, but it's in its exaltation sign. So actually there are 2 levels of strength given to Saturn in this particular chart. But if we're just talking about friends and enemies, Saturn is still stronger because Saturn is in a friend sign. Because Venus owns Libra and Venus is a friend to Saturn. Okay. Then if we go to the 3rd house here, so in a North Indian style chart, you count houses counterclockwise. You go 1, 2, 3, and you'll see the sun there, the 9th constellation, or Sagittarius. So, 1, we know that this can't be an enemy sign, right? Because Jupiter owns Sagittarius, rules Sagittarius, and Jupiter is an enemy to no one. So anything in Sagittarius or Pisces, it's like either a friend or neutral, but not an enemy. Okay. So since Sun, though, plays by the rules, the 2 camp rules, and the first camp is Sun, Mars, Moon, Jupiter, Sun is in a friend sign here. So that's why it's colored green. Okay. Then if we move to the 4th house, now we have Jupiter in Capricorn. Again, the little 10 there represents the 10th constellation of the zodiac, or Capricorn, Makara in Sanskrit. Okay. Now, Jupiter, again, this is sort of like Saturn in terms of we're looking at friends and enemies, but we would also potentially determine exaltation, debilitation. So Jupiter's debilitated in Capricorn. Okay. And that would take precedence. But if we're also adding in the layer of friend and enemy, relationships, would we expect, if we're just using the 2 camp rule, would we expect Jupiter to be in a friend house of Saturn? No, because Saturn is in a different camp, right? The 2nd camp is Venus, Mercury, Saturn. Okay. And is Jupiter one of the planets that has exceptions to the 2 camp rule? No, because the 2 planets that have exceptions are Mercury and Moon. So with Jupiter being in a sign owned or ruled by Saturn, we would expect the relationship to be either neutral or an enemy. And in this case, Saturn is neutral to Jupiter, so I've colored it blue. Okay. Then if we keep going, directly opposite the 4th house is the 10th house. The 10th house here is ruled by Cancer, and Cancer is ruled by the Moon. So the 10th house is a Moon-ruled house, and we have Mercury and we have Mars. Okay. Now, let's see. Right. Well, first of all, we know Moon. Oh, no, excuse me. Sorry. Let me roll back a little bit. Okay. So again, not to get confused, but just to note, Mars in Cancer is debilitated. So Mars has weakness because it's in Cancer. And that's actually takes precedent over this concept of friends and enemies. But if we're looking at the, at the level, if we're analyzing things at the level of friends and enemies, Mars is in a friend sign because Mars plays by the rules, right? Mars is the guest. Mars plays by the rules, which is unusual for Mars actually, because that's not usually how Mars goes. But in terms of the two camp rule, it does. Um, and so again, the first camp is Mars, Moon, Sun, and Jupiter. So Mars in Cancer is in friend sign because the Cancer is ruled by Moon, and Moon is a friend to Mars. Okay, and we also have Mercury here. Now we wouldn't expect, well, we can't really tell with Mercury, right? Because Mercury has exceptions, but um, we would guess first off, if Mercury did play by the rules, Moon is in the other camp, opposite camp of Mercury, so we would guess that Cancer is either a neutral or an enemy sign to Mercury. And in fact, the Moon is the only enemy sign for Mercury. So that means that Mercury is going to be in an enemy sign here, and that's going to weaken Mercury. Okay. And then the last planet here, we have Venus in Leo. Okay, and Leo is ruled by the Sun. Okay, now we know that the Sun is in the opposite camp of Venus, so we would guess, if we were guessing, that this is not a friend sign to Venus, and that is actually the case. So we would guess that Sun is either a neutral or an enemy to Venus, or excuse me, Leo would be a sign that's either neutral or an enemy sign to Venus because it's ruled by Sun, and Sun is in the opposite camp. But if you remember too, the two enemies of Venus, the two ruling planets that are enemy to Venus are the Sun and the Moon. Because again, if you remember that little story of Venus being vain and not liking to be outshone by the two bright luminaries, Sun and Moon, then Venus is in an enemy sign. Okay. So it takes a little bit, I still actually, it's funny, even though I've been doing Jyotish for years, I still sometimes, have to look at the chart to remind myself because it can get a little bit confusing. And again, in terms of my training, I was trained that the exaltation debilitation status is more important and more influential than the friend and enemy status. But, again, if we're looking at nuances, then this is important. Okay. All right. So there you go. Planetary friends and enemies, Mitra and Shatru. So as always, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by to listen to one of my talks. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can all be found there. I do offer individual birth chart readings on Zoom. If that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. Somebody was asking me about making donations. If that's something you'd like to do, it would be appreciated. The donation link is paypal.me /heartlightastro. Um, and I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine that includes other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms of natural medicine such as homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that channel is called Nature Source Care. So that's all available to you if that's interesting also. So as always, I hope you found this interesting, helpful, and useful to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. So until the next one, take care. Namaste.